Is it the Red River Rivalry, the Red River Shootout, the Red River Showdown? I know that those three in a row are difficult to say consecutively, but take your pick, whatever it is. It's Oklahoma, Texas. It's the biggest game in the Big 12 by far. Look across the nation at every other conference. You can easily have a debate with your family and friends over what is the biggest game of the conference season. Not in the Big 12 unless things change drastically, and I mean come out of nowhere. It's Oklahoma versus Texas and has been for the past few years. We got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football to help us break it down, especially from the Sooner side. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, Mark. Thanks for having me. Ready to get it cranked up.
There you go. There you go. It's always a good one. And even when Texas was down, they would jump up and scare Oklahoma or take them down as they did the first time the Sooners made the college football playoff. So this one has really amped up in the last year and a half since Texas has generally come back to be able to challenge Oklahoma, of course, win the game head-to-head, and then fall in a close one in the past, like in the last 5 minutes of the game when Oklahoma took over in the Big 12 championship game. So your broad overview to start us out on what we could see that's very similar or what could be different about this one.
You know, Mark, I think the interesting thing about this game, and it seems like every year, you kind of expect the unexpected, right? This year it's a little bit different from Oklahoma standpoint in terms of, what probably if you're an Oklahoma fan, what maybe makes you a little bit nervous is the fact that they haven't really been tested. The schedule's been, really weak to start off with, and certainly you can't blame the schedule makers. When they scheduled UCLA, when they scheduled Houston, those look like pretty good out of conference games to start the season. However, UCLA has had their struggles, and as has Houston. So, in the first time that I can ever remember, and kind of following this game, following college football, the Big 12, and the rivalry overall, it's the first year that I can remember that Oklahoma's really just never been has not been challenged. They've not been battle tested. So that's probably got to be a little bit of a concern from the Oklahoma standpoint. But you even alluded to it in the front, Mark. One of the things that's been a little strange about this game over the last 6 or 7 years, Oklahoma hasn't played well. I'm down in Dallas. I think early in the 2000s, the calling card was, from Bob Stoops, his team perspective is they were always ready to go. They played really well in this game, starting out from, even 99, the first year that Bob Stoops was there, they played well in the first half, couldn't quite keep it going. But then, especially early on in his career at Oklahoma dominated the series in the early 2000s and, won 5 consecutive games there from 2000 to 2004. And like I said, played really well in this game. However, as of late, the last 6-7 years, Oklahoma hasn't really put together a complete game against Texas. They've won a couple. They certainly won a couple of games in the series, but haven't played their best. Both offensively, defensively, and special teams. Last year, they played well offensively in the game, but certainly defensively was a different story, giving up 48 points, and which led to the ultimate dismissal of Mike Stoops as the defensive coordinator. Then there's a couple of times within the last 6 or 7 years that they have, for whatever reason, they've been heavy favorites, and Texas has come out and played well. Maybe it was kind of a not respecting the opponent type of scenario, but it'll be interesting to see the mindset. You could anybody that watched the Oklahoma game versus Kansas could tell they didn't care about that game. They were focused on Texas. You could tell that pretty much from the opening, from the opening spot. And it's a little bit of a tough spot for Oklahoma. Going into that Texas game, playing Kansas, they probably weren't certainly amped up for that Kansas game. Then you have the rain delay, you have the 11 a.m., you have kind of the rainy, sleepy start. So it was a little bit to be expected. So will be really interesting to see, if they can put together a complete game this year, which, like I said, they haven't done in the last 6 or 7 years.
Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football. It's Oklahoma, Texas. It's like no other rivalry in college football, one of the very best. And speaking of which, before we dive back into the nuts and bolts of the football X's and O's, you're going to the game. You've been around the rivalry. You understand the rivalry. I've got the perspective of a national perspective. I watch the game every year. I understand the history. I know who's won the games, all that sort of thing. But I'm removed from the scene. All the big rivalries have a certain feel, certain history, traditions involved. What comes to mind when you think OU Texas and what sets it apart?
Yeah, Mark, I think the backdrop of the game for me is probably the biggest thing that maybe sets it apart. Of course, I'm a little biased. I've been to this game for, I've attended it the last 6 or 7 years. I've been, down there, kind of as a fan, just an onlooker, taking in the environment. I think so. I think you got Auburn, Alabama. You've got, you got Army, Navy. You've got, of course, Michigan, Ohio State, which many people nationally think is the best rivalry. Like I said, I think the setting and the backdrop, really kind of sets this game apart from others. It's certainly played in a neutral site, and from a neutral site, what's obviously everybody knows this, but what's most interesting about this is the uniqueness of the field being split 50-50 down the middle. And I don't think you can fully appreciate that aspect until you've been there live and in person, knowing that on each and every play, you have half of the stadium, you have 45,000 fans that are amped up and charged and are excited on every single play. It's something you don't certainly see very often. And then also the backdrop of the Texas State Fair there, which is unlike any other. So, I think those are a couple of the things that really set it apart. Obviously, there's a lot of hatred between Oklahoma and Texas. It's not an intrastate rival, but sure, Oklahoma and Texas, they've been the biggest. They've been each other's biggest rival. With it, Oklahoma State's more kind of an in-state rival with Texas, and Texas and Texas A&M. With that game not being played anymore, this is certainly both teams' biggest game, biggest rivalry of the season. And one of the things that I've said is, it brings out some of the best and some of the worst in some of these teams that you've seen over the year. You almost don't know what to expect going into this game, because there's been so many years where Oklahoma's been really good coming into this game, and they've just not played well. And then there's been so many years that the teams have been coming in pretty evenly matched. And Oklahoma's dominated the game. There's been a couple of 63-14, couple of 65-13, blowout wins for Oklahoma when both teams have been highly ranked. So I think some of those things kind of bring into the uniqueness of the rivalry in the game itself.
Jason, we talked a lot of Jalen Hurts in the offseason and how that might affect the offense in regards to his skill set versus Baker and Kyler. Are you surprised at how good Jalen Hurts is?
Yeah, I think I am, Mark. I think I am a little bit. He's performed, specifically throwing the ball downfield. He's performed a lot better than I anticipated him playing. That was certainly one of the big drawbacks coming from Alabama over to Oklahoma. But yes, I have been surprised at really the level that he's been playing at. Maybe we shouldn't be surprised, based on how good of a quarterback whisperer, offensive coordinator, offensive genius that Lincoln Riley has been over the years. But yeah, I'm a little bit surprised that he's played as well as he has early. Having said that, he probably, nitpicking a little bit, he didn't have a great game against Kansas. Nobody really had a great game, consistently. They didn't play well in that game. By far I would say by far their worst performance of the year, and certainly, kind of the build up for this OU Texas game played into that a little bit. But I'll be interested to see offensively how he responds. He did throw an interception, on a bad decision and a bad throw down the field. He did really almost handpick a pick six to Kansas in the first half on a screen to CeeDee Lamb that the Kansas kid just dropped. So interesting to see how he follows that up. I think he only had about 225 yards passing, which was not his best of the year, but he still accounted for 4 touchdowns. He still he was still pretty efficient. I believe 14 out of 22, 225, 2 touchdowns, and the 1 interception. So, with the biggest test that he'll have this year. I know Texas has struggled a little bit, specifically in the secondary, defensively this year. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he kind of comes back from that performance last week.